The ruins of Xandar still wept. 2 years after Ronan's assault had cracked the Nova Corps' proudest world like an egg, the rebuilt sectors gleamed with fresh plasteel and optimistic architecture. But venture far enough from the restoration zones, and you'd find craters the size of cities, monuments to what unchecked power could do when it wore a righteous face. The galaxy had learned that lesson in blood and rubble. It had learned it again with Thanos. It kept needing to learn it, which suggested the galaxy was a slow student. The Guardians of the Galaxy were parked in one of those craters. Technically, the Milano II, Star-Lord having insisted on the name Upgrade despite unanimous objection, was conducting a salvage operation on the outskirts of Xandar's eastern hemisphere, cataloging recoverable Nova Corps tech that the Reconstruction government hadn't gotten to yet. Practically, Rocket Raccoon was elbow-deep in a decommissioned warship's engine housing, muttering profanity in 6 languages, while Peter Quill sat on a hull panel eating a protein bar and trying to look supervisory. Drax sharpened a blade that was already sharp enough to split a photon. Mantis communed with what she called the emotional residue of the dead, a habit that made everyone deeply uncomfortable. Nebula ran perimeter scans with the focused intensity of someone who had decided that productivity was the only acceptable substitute for peace. Groot, recently resprouted to adolescent size, was balanced on a collapsed antenna array, growing small flowers in the joins of his fingers and dropping them into the wind for reasons he hadn't explained and likely couldn't. It was, by Guardian standards, a quiet Tuesday. Then the sky tore open. Not dramatically, no thunderclap, no blinding column of divine light, nothing Quill could have set to music. Just a sudden, surgical wrongness above the eastern ridge. A ripple in space that lasted approximately 3 seconds and deposited a single figure from an altitude of roughly 40 meters directly onto the surface of Xandar, with an impact that sent a shockwave of displaced dust rolling outward in a perfect circle. Nebula's scanner shrieked. Rocket's head snapped up from the engine housing, fur bristling. The crater they'd been working in now contained a second, smaller crater. And from that smaller crater, something climbed out. He was not what any of them expected, though to be fair, none of them had been expecting anything. Medium height, powerfully built in the way of someone whose body had been destroyed and rebuilt so many times it had simply given up being anything other than indestructible. Black hair that defied physics, standing in a gravity-immune spike above a face that held an expression of pure, unguarded delight. The kind of open-mouthed wonder a child shows when they see something extraordinary. He was wearing an orange gi that had seen combat but carried no blood, and he was looking at his hands, turning them over slowly as though checking they were still attached. Then he looked up at the ruins of Xandar spreading to every horizon, at the half-restored skyline and the stars beyond it, and his expression shifted from wonder to something more complicated, quieter. A Saiyan's instincts never fully switch off, and something in the way this world's sky sat told him, this place lost a war recently. He recognized the particular quality of a horizon that used to have more on it. "Huh," said Son Goku, "this isn't Beerus's planet." Rocket was the first to recover. He always was, survival instincts sharpened to a paranoid edge by a life that had given him every reason to expect the worst. His largest hand cannon was leveled at the crater within 1.4 seconds of the figure standing. "Don't move, don't breathe weird, don't do whatever you were just doing with the sky." He squinted at his scanner with the other hand. "What is that reading? Nebula, what am I looking at?" Nebula's eyes moved across her display with the careful attention of someone who had spent years in Thanos' war rooms learning that an unidentified energy signature was almost always a problem. "The energy output is massive, off my current scale, but the biological readings are," she paused, "humanoid, carbon-based, oxygen-dependent." Another pause longer. "Elevated, significantly elevated, but not," she couldn't find the word for what it wasn't, "mechanical." "He's not a robot," Mantis said helpfully. "I can see he's not a robot," Rocket said. "He's not angry either." Mantis tilted her head, antennae swaying. She was reaching out gently with her empathic sense, testing the emotional temperature of this stranger the way you test bath water with a cautious toe. What she found made her blink. He's happy, genuinely happy, and curious, and a little bit, she smiled despite herself. Excited. Drax had not drawn a weapon. He stood with his arms crossed, studying the stranger with the evaluative intensity of a man conducting a very serious interview. He survived a fall that would have killed anything without significant biological fortification, Drax announced, as though delivering a verdict. He is either extraordinarily durable or extraordinarily foolish. I wish to determine which. Both can be true, Nebula said. In my experience, Star-Lord said, dropping from his hull panel and trying to project the casual authority of someone absolutely in charge. Both is usually the answer. He approached with his elemental blasters loose in their holsters, hands visible, eyes reading the stranger's body language for threat indicators the way Yondu had taught him 20 years ago on a ship that smelled like engine grease and bad decisions. What he found was a man standing in a crater with no apparent concern for the weapon pointed at him, looking at the ruins of Xandar with an expression that had shifted into something like sorrow. Not performed sorrow, real sorrow. The kind that appears on a face when it encounters evidence of mass death and doesn't know what to do with that knowledge except feel it. Okay, Quill thought, that's either genuine or the best con I've ever seen. Hey, he said, you just fell out of a hole in space. The stranger turned those dark eyes on him. Yeah, that happens more than you'd think. His voice carried an accent none of the Guardian's translators could fully place, not because it was alien, but because it was somehow fundamental, like the sound of someone who had spoken in 100 registers and let them all blur together into something unclassifiable. Sorry about the landing. I didn't have a lot of control over the exit point. He scratched the back of his head with the sheepish gesture of a man apologizing for tracking mud on a clean floor. Is this what planet is this? What system? Xandar, Nebula said. Nova system. Something crossed his face. That name doesn't mean anything to me. He looked at the ruins again. What happened here? A lot, Rocket said, not lowering the cannon. Most of it is bad, some of it is apocalyptic. Why do you care? Because it looks like people died. He said it simply, without calculation. A lot of people. He wasn't asking for strategic intelligence or mapping threat vectors. He was just acknowledging it. The weight of it sat on him for a moment visibly, and then he straightened and the weight didn't disappear, but he carried it differently. The way someone carries grief who has learned that grief and forward motion aren't mutually exclusive. I'm Goku, Son Goku. I got pulled through something, a dimensional tear, I think, and I ended up here. He looked at each of them in turn. Direct eye contact, no aggression, no performance. Just a man taking stock of a situation with the unnerving calm of someone who has faced things that make every other threat negotiable. Are you the ones in charge of this planet? Star-Lord straightened his jacket. We're the Guardians of the Galaxy. Goku nodded slowly, processing this. Okay. He looked at the gun still pointed at his chest. You can put that down. I'm not going to attack you. A small pause. Unless you want to spar later, that's different. Rocket stared at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Quill. I hate this already, he said, which in Rocket's emotional vocabulary meant he was intrigued. From the antenna array, Groot let a small flower fall. It drifted down and landed in Goku's upturned hand, and the Saiyan looked at it with that open, unguarded smile, the smile of someone who finds small, beautiful things genuinely surprising. And something in the watching Guardians shifted, almost imperceptibly, like a compass needle catching a new north. If you want to see more characters cross into different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you want to see them in down in the comments below. Hope shines brightest in the darkest night. Rocket Raccoon had a rule about things that fell from the sky. The rule was simple. Anything that arrived without an invitation, a transponder signal, or, at a minimum, A politely filed flight path was operating outside acceptable parameters and should be treated as hostile until proven otherwise. He had developed this rule through a rigorous scientific process involving several near-death experiences, one incident on Sovereign that he refused to discuss, and a general philosophy that the universe was fundamentally adversarial, and the only sane response was to be more adversarial first. The rule had served him well. Son Goku was currently stress-testing the rule into early retirement. They'd brought him aboard the Milano II because Nebula had pointed out, correctly, infuriatingly, that conducting an interrogation in an open crater on a partially rebuilt world while broadcasting a significant unknown energy signature to every scanner in the Nova system was tactically stupid. The ship's common area was now arranged in what Rocket privately categorized as a soft perimeter. Himself on the elevated platform near the cockpit ladder with a clear sightline, Nebula at the table with her scanner running continuous reads, Drax standing against the far wall in a posture that was technically relaxed and actually a loaded spring, Mantis on the bench closest to the stranger. Groot had climbed to his favorite perch above the ventilation housing and was watching with the serene attention of someone who had decided this was probably fine. Star-Lord was doing the talking. He always insisted on doing the talking. "So you're telling me," Quill said, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed in the posture he decided communicated authority, "that where you come from, there are guys stronger than you." "Oh, definitely," Goku said. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor because he'd politely declined a chair, and the posture made him look simultaneously like a monk in meditation and a soldier at rest, comfortable in his body in a way that suggested his body had never once failed him when it mattered. He was eating. Mantis had offered the last of their Xandarian protein rations, which everyone had assumed he'd politely decline, and he had instead eaten 4 of them with the focused appreciation of a man who burns through calories the way a star burns through hydrogen. "In my universe, there's a being called Beerus, god of destruction. I've fought him twice. The first time he knocked me out with a finger flick, a small, genuine smile. I'm a lot stronger now, but I'd still rather not make him angry." "A god of destruction," Drax repeated. He had not moved from the wall. His eyes had the quality of someone running very careful calculations. "And you fought this being, twice." "Yeah. And survived." "Well, the second time I did better than survive. We had a good fight." There was a light in Goku's eyes when he said this, not bloodlust, which Drax would have recognized and respected in a straightforward way, but something more specific. Enthusiasm. The genuine, uncomplicated enthusiasm of someone who loves their craft the way a musician loves an instrument, and whose craft happened to be combat at a cosmological scale. "That's kind of why I was in the middle of a tournament of power when the rift opened. 50 fighters from 8 universes, winner takes everything." A pause. "I was in the middle of a pretty good fight, actually. I hope they paused it." Rocket's scanner emitted a soft alarm tone. He silenced it and stared at the readout, then stared at it again. Then he looked at Goku, then back at the scanner, with the expression of an engineer whose instruments are telling him something his engineering degree did not prepare him for. "Hey," he said. "Nebula." "I see it," Nebula said quietly. "You want to explain to me how this guy's biological output is registering at a level that should require a small nuclear plant to sustain?" "I don't have an explanation. The readings are accurate." Rocket set the scanner down with the careful movements of someone putting a delicate thing somewhere safe while they process difficult information. "Okay," he said. He looked at Goku. "Okay, what exactly can you do, physically? I need a complete inventory because my brain is having an argument with my instruments and I want to settle it." Goku considered this with evident seriousness, the way someone considers an honest question they want to answer honestly. "Super strength, obviously. Flight. I can read and sense energy signatures, Kai, we call it, from most living things. I can teleport instantly to any location where I can sense a Kai signature, though in this universe, I'm having trouble locking on because the energy feels different here. Like trying to tune a radio to a frequency that's just slightly off from what I'm used to. He frowned thoughtfully. I fire concentrated energy blasts. The Kamehameha is the main one, but there are others. I can transform. I have different power states that scale up significantly. Ultra Instinct is the highest. In that state, my body reacts faster than my mind can think. He paused, checking his inventory. I heal fast. I've been dead twice and came back both times, though that was through external means rather than personal ability. Another pause. I think that's the main list. Silence. Star-Lord was looking at Goku with an expression he was working very hard to keep neutral and not entirely succeeding. Quill had spent his adult life being the most capable human in most rooms he entered, which wasn't a high bar but was his bar, and he'd expanded it by being the most resourceful non-powered person on a ship full of extraordinary people, which was more meaningful. He was good at his job. He was legitimately good. And sitting across from a man who had apparently fought gods for fun and listed death as an experience he'd had twice, like a travel inconvenience, was triggering a specific, familiar feeling he associated with the word inadequate and usually suppressed with sarcasm. "So," he said, voice perfectly even, "you're basically Superman." "I don't know what that is." "The most powerful guy in any room." Goku shook his head, and it was clearly not false modesty. It was the considered response of someone who has a very accurate understanding of where they sit in a hierarchy, because that hierarchy has beaten it into them repeatedly, and they've found the information useful rather than discouraging. "Not even close. I'm strong for a mortal. In the context of my universe's power scale, I'm maybe a 7 out of 10, and that took me my whole life and dying a couple of times to reach." He looked at Quill directly. "Is the most powerful person always the most important one? In my experience, that's not usually how it works." It was, Peter Quill thought, an extraordinarily well-aimed thing to say to him specifically. And the fact that it had clearly not been calculated, that Goku had simply said an honest thing, made it hit harder rather than softer. Drax pushed off the wall. He crossed the room in 5 measured strides and stopped directly in front of Goku, looking down at him with the evaluative attention he usually reserved for opponents he intended to respect. "You said you enjoy fighting," Drax said. "I love it," Goku confirmed without embarrassment. "You fight to kill." "No, I fight to get stronger, and because a good fight is," he searched for the word, "honest. You can't fake it. You find out who someone really is when they're fighting at their limit." He looked up at Drax with a curiosity that was itself a form of respect. "You've lost people," Goku said, and it wasn't a question. Drax's jaw set. "My family, my wife, my daughter." "And you fight because of them." "I fight so that what happened to them cannot happen again, so that those responsible suffer consequence." Goku held that for a moment. "That's a real reason," he said quietly. "That's a better reason than mine." He didn't say it to be diplomatic. He said it because he meant it. After all, a Saiyan raised on Earth had learned through decades and losses of his own that fighting for others gave a punch weight that fighting for its own sake never could. "I'm sorry about your family." Drax stared at him for a long moment. The room was very quiet. Then Drax turned and walked back to his position at the wall. "He is not an enemy," Drax announced. Rocket looked at the ceiling. "Great, now Drax likes him. This is going to be a disaster." Mantis was smiling the way she smiled when she sensed something that made her quietly glad. Groot, from his perch above the ventilation housing, let another small flower fall. It drifted down and landed in Goku's hair, and the Saiyan reached up, found it, and tucked it behind his ear with the uncomplicated ease of a man who has never once worried about looking undignified. Outside the viewports, the ruins of Xandar stretched to the horizon, and somewhere in the Nova system's outer sensor range, a transponder ping was beginning to track the Milano II's position, methodical, patient, Nova Core grade in its precision, suggesting that someone official and probably armed had noticed the dimensional anomaly in Xandar's atmosphere and was now very interested in what it had left behind. The Nova Corps had not had a good 2 years. This was an institutional understatement of the kind that organizations develop when the honest version. We were functionally annihilated, rebuilt from scratch, and are currently operating at 30% of pre-Ronin capacity while pretending the number is higher, is too demoralizing to say out loud in briefing rooms. Commander Denarian Earl of the reconstituted Nova Corps Cosmic Threat Assessment Division had been doing this job for 14 months, which made her one of the more experienced officers in a corps where experience was measured in survival rather than tenure. She was good at the job because she was constitutionally incapable of pretending a problem was smaller than it was, which made her unpopular in briefing rooms and extremely effective in the field. The dimensional anomaly report on her screen was, by any reasonable measure, a significant problem. The breach lasted 3.2 seconds, said her analyst, pulling the sensor data onto the room's main display. Localized above the Eastern Restoration Zone. No matching signature in our database, not quantum realm incursion, not dark dimension bleed, not Asgardian Bifrost residue, not anything the Kree or Skrull use. A pause. The energy profile is entirely unclassified. We have no framework for what produced it. And the figure that came through. Single biological entity. The Milano II, Guardians of the Galaxy, retrieved it within 11 minutes of landing. They're currently holding a position in the eastern crater. The analyst hesitated with the specific hesitation of someone about to say something they'd prefer not to. Commander, the biological energy readings we're getting from inside that ship they're significant. Whatever came through that breach, it's not a standard threat profile. Earl looked at the energy readings for a long moment. In her 14 months, she had processed threats involving Infinity Stone residue, rogue Asgardian tech, 3 separate Kree splinter factions, and one deeply unpleasant incident with an elder of the universe that she had been officially instructed to classify as a weather event. The readings on her screen were larger than any of those. Not marginally larger, categorically larger. "Get me a channel to the Guardians," she said. "And scramble a quad of interceptors. Non-aggressive formation. I want presence, not provocation." Rocket saw the interceptors coming on the Milano II's long-range sensors 4 minutes before they arrived, which gave him exactly enough time to be annoyed about it, and not quite enough time to do anything useful. For Nova Corps ships in a standard containment formation, not weapons hot, but not casual either. The kind of approach that said we are being polite, but we have done the math on whether we can destroy you. "Company," he announced. Goku was standing at the viewport, looking at the stars with the focused attention of someone trying to learn a new language by listening very carefully to how native speakers breathe. He'd been quiet for 10 minutes, which Mantis had reported, unprompted, because Mantis always reported emotional data unprompted, was a meditative quiet rather than a troubled one. He was trying to recalibrate his Kai sensing to the frequency of this universe's energy, the way a musician in a new acoustic space plays long tones to understand how the room carries sound. Occasionally, his eyes would close, and he would go very still, and something at the edge of the scanner's sensitivity would flicker, a pulse of energy so controlled it was almost invisible, like watching someone breathe deliberately. He looked at the approaching ships with calm assessment. "Those are military." "Law enforcement," Quill said, pulling up the Nova Corps transponder signatures. "Galactic level. They enforce interplanetary law in this system, and technically on behalf of most of the civilized galaxy, though their jurisdiction gets complicated the further out you go." "Are they going to be a problem?" "Depends on what they want." Quill opened the comm channel before Rocket could object. Rocket always wanted to object to opening comm channels with official entities, on the reasonable grounds that official entities rarely contacted you with good news. "This is Peter Quill, Star-Lord, Captain of the Milano II. We're reading your approach, Commander. How can the Guardians assist the Nova Corps today? Commander Eerol's voice came through with the measured quality of someone choosing every word carefully. Star-Lord, we're registering an unclassified biological entity aboard your vessel following a dimensional breach event 47 minutes ago. Nova Corps Cosmic Threat Assessment requires you to facilitate an inspection and interview. This is not optional. Quill looked at Goku. Goku shrugged, a very particular shrug, the shrug of someone who has been regarded as a cosmic threat by official bodies before and found the designation more amusing than alarming. I don't mind talking to them, he said. You don't have to, Quill started. I know, but if they're trying to protect people, that's reasonable. Goku said it simply. I showed up unannounced through a hole in their sky. I'd want to know what I was dealing with too. Rocket stared at him. You are genuinely the most uncomplicated person I have ever met, and I mean that as a criticism. The inspection team came aboard with professional efficiency. 4 Nova officers in full core armor, scanners active, hands near but not on weapons. Commander Eerol herself led the team, a woman of perhaps 40 with the posture of someone who had decided that projecting certainty was a professional obligation regardless of what she actually felt. She took one look at Goku and her scanner and kept her face carefully neutral, which was the tell that the scanner was saying something her face wanted to react to. The interview was conducted in Milano II's common area. Goku answered every question directly and without apparent strategy, where he came from, how he arrived, and what his capabilities were, with the guileless transparency of someone who has never learned that information is leverage because information has never needed to be leveraged for him. He didn't omit things. He didn't reframe things. He answered what was asked and occasionally added context he thought was relevant. Eerol's interview technique was calibrated for evasion, and it kept finding nothing to push against. You're telling me, she said midway through, that in your universe of origin there exists a hierarchy of beings you describe as gods of destruction, angels, and a singular entity called the Grand Zeno who can erase universes. Erase whole universes, yeah, he's done it before. Goku paused. He's actually pretty friendly once you get to know him. He likes games. The Nova officer to Eerol's left made a small, involuntary sound. And these beings are aware you've crossed dimensional boundaries. Probably by now, though honestly Zeno-sama might think it's funny, he considered. Wise definitely knows. He knows everything I do almost immediately. A slight frown. Actually, I'm a little surprised no one's come to retrieve me yet. That might mean the breach sealed in a way that makes return complicated. He said this with the tone of someone nodding that the train they plan to take has been canceled, inconvenient, worth addressing, not catastrophic. I'll need to figure out how to get back eventually. I have a family. Something shifted in the room at that. Not tactically, humanly. Eerol looked at him with the evaluative reassessment of someone updating a threat profile in real time and finding that the update was moving the profile in an unexpected direction. Mantis, from the bench, made brief eye contact with Nebula, the eye contact of people who recognize something real. For now, Eerol said carefully, the Nova Corps position is that you represent an unclassified dimensional incursion. Standard protocol requires. Commander, this was Rocket from the elevated platform, in the tone he used when he'd been doing math while the conversation happened, and the math had produced an answer he found tactically useful. Standard protocol for an unclassified incursion from a universe with a being who erases other universes for fun requires you to what exactly? Detain him in a Nova Corps holding facility. I've seen those facilities. The cells are rated for Kree warriors. He let that hang in the air for a moment. What happens to your facility if he disagrees with being in it? Eerol looked at Goku. Goku looked back at her with an expression of complete non-threat that somehow made the question more rather than less pointed. I wouldn't break out of a cell just because I didn't want to be there, Goku said. That wouldn't be right. But you could, Eerol said. A long pause. Yeah, he said honestly, I could. The comm unit on Earl's armor chirped. She stepped aside to answer it, and when she turned back, her face had acquired a new quality, not fear, but the specific controlled alertness of someone who has just received information that changes the strategic picture significantly. "There's a development," she said. "A Kree military vessel, Accusator class, has entered the Nova system. It's transmitting a bounty claim." She looked at Goku. "For you." Goku blinked, then bafflingly he smiled. "Oh, so someone out here has already heard of me." "The bounty was filed 40 minutes ago," Earl said, "which was 11 minutes before you arrived." The room went very quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when everyone in them simultaneously realizes that the situation is both more complicated and more dangerous than it appeared 30 seconds ago. Rocket's hand moved to his largest weapon with the unconscious reflex of a creature whose survival instincts had been honed past the point of conscious thought. Nebula's jaw set with the expression she wore when she was already planning 3 moves. Drax's stillness became a different kind of stillness, not rest, but the coiled readiness of someone who has decided that whatever comes through the door next is going to find him already in motion. Star-Lord looked at Goku. "Someone filed a bounty on you before you even got here," he said, "in a universe you've never been to. Apparently, that doesn't concern you." Goku tilted his head with the thoughtful consideration of a man taking a question seriously that his instincts were treating as trivially manageable. "It's interesting," he decided. "Someone knew I was coming, or knew something was coming through that breach." He looked at the viewport, at the stars, at the direction the Accusator was presumably approaching from. His Kai sense was reaching, stretching, trying to find the shape of whatever was out there in the frequencies of this unfamiliar universe. "And they want me contained before I can get my bearings." A small pause. His eyes came back to the room with a focus that was different from his previous expression, still warm, still fundamentally good-natured, but sharpened by something underneath. The Saiyan underneath. "That's actually a good reason to get my bearings quickly." Rocket looked at Quill. Quill looked at Nebula. Nebula looked at the ceiling with the expression of someone who has made peace with chaos as a lifestyle. "All right," Star-Lord said, straightening his jacket. "So, Guardian's business as usual then." The Accusator class vessel was named Purity of Verdict, which Rocket noted was exactly the kind of name a Kree military ship would have: aspirational, humorless, and carrying the specific ideological freight of a civilization that had spent millennia confusing conquest with righteousness. It was 1,400 meters of gray-white hull plating, forward weapons arrays capable of glassing a city block from orbit, and enough soldiers in its belly to pacify a mid-sized moon. It had dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Nova system's 3rd orbital band, and was now holding position with the deliberate patience of something that knows it is the largest object in the immediate conversation. Commander Vale Sordin of the Kree Accuser Corps transmitted his demands without preamble. Because preamble was a courtesy, the Kree extended only to civilizations they considered worth the diplomacy. His face on the Milano II's comm screen had the architecture of absolute institutional confidence, the face of a man who had spent his career operating inside a framework that told him he was right and had never given him compelling evidence to the contrary. He wore full Accuser armor, pale blue-white, with the universal weapon magnetically docked at his back. The entity designated Anomaly Breach 7 is to be surrendered to Kree military custody immediately. Any vessel providing shelter or assistance to the entity will be designated obstructionist and treated accordingly. "Treated accordingly," Rocket repeated, pulling up the Accusator's weapon specs on his secondary screen and running engagement calculations with the focused displeasure of an engineer confronting a problem he finds personally offensive. "What do you think that means?" "It means they shoot us," Nebula said. "I know what it means." It was a rhetorical expression of, he stopped. "Why do you people always explain my rhetorical expressions?" Goku was at the viewport again, looking at the Accusator's distant shape, too far to see with human eyes, But his Kai sense had found it, mapping its outline in the energy frequencies of this universe's living signatures. Hundreds of them are aboard. He could feel the particular quality of military readiness in those signatures, the compressed, disciplined energy of trained soldiers told to expect a fight. He'd felt that quality in Kai many times. It never got easier to think about clearly when it was pointed at people who didn't deserve it. They knew about the breach before it happened, he said quietly, not turning from the viewport, which means they either predicted it or caused it. Quill looked at Nebula. Nebula looked at her scanner with the expression of someone who has arrived at the same conclusion and is unhappy about it. If they caused the breach, Nebula said slowly, then they opened a dimensional rift into another universe for the specific purpose of pulling something through. The energy requirement for that would be, she searched for a frame of reference, beyond anything the Kree currently possess officially. Officially, Rocket said, with the inflection of a word that is doing a great deal of work. Kree splinter factions are operating outside Imperial sanction, Nebula continued. After Thanos, institutional authority across the galaxy fragmented. Some of those factions have been acquiring technology through channels that don't appear in any official ledger. She set the scanner down. If a splinter faction with access to dimensional breach technology wanted to acquire a specific asset from another universe, they'd need to know the asset existed first, Drax said. He had moved from the wall without anyone noticing and was now standing beside Goku at the viewport, looking at the distant ship with the evaluative attention of a man calculating odds he has already decided are acceptable. Someone told them about Goku. Goku turned from the viewport. His expression was not troubled exactly, but it had the quality of someone reorganizing their understanding of a situation and finding the new arrangement more interesting than the old one. In his universe, being hunted for his power was not a novel experience. Various villains across his career had targeted him for acquisition, conversion, or elimination, and the pattern had always followed similar logic. Someone hears about the strongest fighter in a universe, decides that power is a resource to be controlled, and dispatches assets accordingly. The specifics changed. The logic didn't. If they pulled me here on purpose, he said, they want to use me for something. Or study you, Nebula said. Kree science divisions have been attempting to develop super soldiers for decades. A biological template with your energy output would represent, she paused, significant research value. I'm not going to let them experiment on me, Goku said, not with heat, just with the calm, complete clarity of someone stating a fact that is so fundamental it doesn't require emphasis. But I'd like to understand what they actually want before we make this a fight. He looked at Quill. Can we talk to them? The commander. We are talking to them, Rocket said. He just told us to hand you over or get shot. That's not talking, that's demanding. Goku's brow furrowed slightly with the specific frustration of someone who has spent decades learning that almost every conflict has a conversation hiding inside it that nobody bothered to find. There's a person inside that armor making a choice. People who make choices can make different choices if you give them a reason. He paused. Usually. Quill stared at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't fully organize. It wasn't naivety, what Goku was describing. Or rather, it was naivety in the technical sense, the sense of naive that meant without cynicism, which was different from stupid and different from inexperienced and different from anything Quill had a clean category for. You genuinely believe that, Quill said. I've seen it work, Goku said, and I've seen what happens when you skip straight to fighting without trying the other thing first. A slight shadow crossed his face, not guilt, but the particular weight of someone carrying specific memories of specific costs. Sometimes you can't avoid the fight, but you should always try the conversation first. Mantis, from the bench, was looking at him with an expression of such uncomplicated recognition that it was almost painful to observe. The expression of someone who has spent their life reading emotions and very rarely encounters one that is completely, transparently what it presents itself as. Rocket made a sound that was technically a sigh but carried the emotional weight of an entire philosophical surrender. "Fine," he said. "We try the conversation, but I'm keeping the weapons hot." Commander Sordin's face when Goku appeared on the comm channel carried a micro-expression of something that was not quite surprise but was adjacent to it. The expression of a man who expected an obstacle and found a person instead, and hadn't fully updated his tactical framework to accommodate the difference. He recovered quickly, because Kree accusers were trained to recover quickly, but the micro-expression had been there. Goku spoke first, which Quill had not anticipated and which turned out to be tactically correct in a way Quill would think about later. "I understand you filed a claim on me before I arrived here," he said. "That means you knew about the breach. I'd like to understand why you opened it and what you actually want from me, because I think there might be a version of this conversation where nobody has to get hurt." A pause from the accusator. Sordin's jaw moved slightly in the way jaws move when a prepared speech has been rendered contextually inappropriate, and its owner is calculating whether to deliver it anyway. The Kree Empire's interests in dimensional anomalies are classified military. "I'm not asking about the Empire's interests," Goku said, and his voice had shifted, still warm, still fundamentally without aggression, but carrying a quality underneath that was new. Not a threat. Something more unsettling than a threat. Complete, unhurried attention. The attention of someone who has sat across from beings of genuine cosmic power and learned to be still while doing it. "I'm asking about yours. You're the one who gave the order. You decided this was worth doing. Why?" Another pause. Longer. Sordin looked at Goku on his own screen with the expression of a man being asked a question he prepared for by someone who isn't asking the prepared version. "There is a threat," Sordin said finally. The institutional tone had modulated slightly, not gone, but thinned. "An entity. It has been moving through this galaxy's outer systems for 6 months. It does not negotiate. It does not respond to conventional military force. 3 Kree outposts in the Helgenter system were destroyed in 12 hours. He let that number sit. "We identified a dimensional signature preceding each attack, a specific resonance that matched the profile of the breach we engineered. We theorized that whatever came through that breach might represent a counter to the entity." He looked at Goku with the complicated expression of a man who has done something he knew was wrong because he couldn't think of anything else to do. "We were not authorized to make contact diplomatically, so we did not." The Milano II's common area was very quiet. "You ripped a hole in the fabric of reality," Nebula said, with the precise diction of someone enumerating a crime, "pulled a sentient being from their universe without consent, filed a bounty claim to ensure military control of that being, and your justification is that you were scared of something else." "We are at war," Sordin said, "the calculus of war." "I understand fear," Goku said, cutting through cleanly without anger. "I understand making bad choices because something worse is coming, and you don't know what else to do. I've done it." He held Sordin's gaze through the comm screen with the steady attention of someone who is not performing forgiveness, but is genuinely attempting to locate understanding. "Tell me about the entity." He did not agree to Kree custody. He was not validating what Sordin had done. He was doing something more precise, finding the real problem inside the political problem, the way you find the actual injury underneath the reaction to the injury. Quill recognized the technique because it was the technique, and he'd never seen anyone deploy it with such a complete absence of calculation. Drax, beside the viewport, crossed his arms with the expression of a man updating a verdict. "He does this," Drax said, to no one in particular. "He finds the thing underneath the thing." "It's annoying," Rocket said, not looking up from his weapons console. "It works, but it's annoying." Mantis smiled quietly. Groot grew a flower. On the comm screen, Commander Sordin began to talk about what was moving through the outer systems, and in the telling his institutional posture gradually, almost imperceptibly, became something more like a person asking for help, and Goku listened with the focused, complete attention of someone for whom listening is itself a form of strength, storing every detail, his Kai sense already reaching outward toward the outer systems, feeling for something vast and cold, and entirely unlike anything this universe's heroes had encountered. He didn't find it yet, but he felt its absence, the particular quality of negative space that very large things leave in the fabric of energy around them, like a shadow cast by something that hasn't arrived yet. His eyes went to the stars beyond the viewport, and for the first time since his arrival, Son Goku looked something other than cheerful. He looked ready. The entity had no name because nothing that had encountered it had survived long enough to give it one. Sordin's intelligence files painted its passage through the outer systems in the cold language of military after-action reports, which was the language of people describing catastrophe at a professional remove, because the alternative was describing it honestly, and honest descriptions of catastrophe have a way of making soldiers stop being soldiers. 3 Kree outposts, a Shi'ar science station, 2 independent mining colonies in the Helgenter Belt, 17 ships of varying class and armament that had intercepted it, engaged it, and been reduced to debris fields so clean they looked deliberate, as though something had not destroyed the ships so much as decided that the space they occupied would be better used for other purposes. The entity moved through the galaxy's outer dark at sublight speeds, which should have made it manageable, except that sublight for something of its scale translated to velocities that gave pursuit vessels approximately 11 minutes of warning before engagement range. Its energy signature, according to the Kree's most sensitive instruments, registered as a form of matter consumption, not energy absorption in the way that certain beings in this universe fed on power, but something more fundamental. It ate the binding forces between particles. It didn't destroy things so much as quietly convince the laws of physics to stop applying to them. Goku sat with this information for a long time after Sordin's transmission ended, cross-legged on the Milano II's floor in the particular stillness that his training had built into him over decades, the stillness of someone listening to something that isn't making sound yet. His Kai sense was extended as far as he could push it in this universe's unfamiliar frequencies, reaching past the Nova System's edge, past the Helgenter Belt's coordinate markers, trying to find the shape of something that consumed the very forces that Kai traveled through. He found it 40 minutes later. It wasn't a Kai signature, nothing like the warm, specific energy of living things or the cold, mechanical pulse of technology. It was more like the place where Kai stopped, a boundary approximately 9 light towers from their current position, beyond which his sensing found not silence but erasure, the difference between an empty room and a room that had never had the concept of fullness. The distinction was small, and it was everything. "I found it," he said. The Guardians had been in various states of tactical preparation, rocket rebuilding the Milano II's secondary shield array, with modifications that probably voided the manufacturer's warranty in several jurisdictions, Nebula cross-referencing Sordin's intelligence files with her own Thanos-era data on cosmic-level threats, Quill doing what Quill did when he was processing something difficult, which was standing at the viewport with music playing quietly from his Zoom, letting classic Earth rock carry the weight of the thing he couldn't quite organize into words. Drax was sharpening the already impossibly sharp blade. Mantis was sitting near Goku, not intruding on his meditation, but maintaining proximity in the way she did when she sensed that someone might need an anchor. They all stopped at his words. "How far?" Nebula asked. 9 light towers, roughly, moving. He paused, continuing to feel its terrible negative shape. It changed direction recently, within the last few hours. Another pause. It's moving toward populated space. Rocket's hand stilled on the shield array components. Toward populated space meaning toward here. Goku opened his eyes. They were calm in the specific way that eyes go calm when the person behind them has processed a threat assessment and arrived at a place past fear into the territory of pure, clear decision. It will reach the Nova System's outer band in approximately 6 days at current velocity. 6 days, Quill said. Give or take. The number sat in the room. 6 days was both a very long time and no time at all, depending on what you were doing with it. 6 days were enough to evacuate a small colony, and not enough to evacuate a system. It was enough to call for reinforcements, and not enough to receive them from most of the galaxy's significant military powers. It was enough to develop a plan, and not enough to test whether the plan worked before you had to use it. We need to go out there, Goku said. Get eyes on it. I need to understand what I'm dealing with before I can figure out how to stop it. You, Rocket said, you need to figure out how to stop it. Someone has to. The Nova Corps has a fleet. The Kree have an accusator sitting in this system right now. There are others. Sordin said conventional military force doesn't work. Goku's voice was patient, not dismissive, the patience of someone who has already followed the logical chain to its end and is waiting for everyone else to arrive there. 17 ships. I felt what's left of them in the energy of the outer systems when I was reaching. There's nothing there, not wreckage, nothing. He looked at Rocket directly. In my universe, when conventional force doesn't work, that's when I find out what I'm actually capable of. A small, genuine smile that shouldn't have been reassuring and somehow was. I've been there before. I know what it costs, but I also know I come through it. You come through it in a universe where you can be wished back to life with magic dragon spheres, Rocket said flatly. Yeah, the smile didn't waver. This universe doesn't have those. No, said everyone simultaneously. Goku nodded slowly. Then I'll be more careful. The question of who went was resolved with the messy, argument-forward, outcome-inevitable logic that Guardian decisions always followed. Everyone going with individual reasons that collectively added up to the same answer. Rocket went because he had modifications to test, and because staying behind while the most interesting engineering problem he'd encountered in years flew towards certain danger was not something his nature permitted. Nebula went because she had spent her life in the proximity of cosmic-scale threats, and retreating from them had never once made them smaller. Drax went because whatever was out there had destroyed things and people, and deserved consequences. Mantis went because she sensed that Goku would need something beyond combat support, and she was the only one whose capability extended in that direction. Groot went because Groot went where the Guardians went. Quill went because he was the captain and captains go, and also because the music playing from his Zune when he made the decision happened to be Don't Stop Me Now by Queen, which he took as cosmically appropriate. The Milano II broke Xandar's orbit with the Kree Accusator falling into formation behind them. Sordin's decision. Communicated in a transmission that was short on diplomatic grace and long on the specific quality of a proud man doing something that costs him pride because the alternative is unconscionable. Commander Eerle's Nova Corps quartet joined the formation at the system's edge. It was not an alliance. It was 3 groups of people moving in the same direction, because the thing ahead of them was large enough to make their differences temporarily irrelevant. Goku stood at the Milano II's forward viewport as they accelerated, his Kai sense extended and probing, reading the shape of the erasure ahead the way a navigator reads currents. He was doing something else simultaneously, something internal, the kind of work that doesn't show on the outside. He was reaching down through his power's layers, checking the architecture of what he had access to in this universe's different physics, testing load-bearing structures the way an engineer checks a bridge before committing weight to it. His Kai was functional, fully functional. The Kamehameha formed and dissolved in his palm 3 times, blue-white energy so concentrated it made the viewport's interior temperature spike measurably, and each formation came faster and held longer than the last, his body calibrating to this universe's slightly different energy conductivity, the way an athlete's muscles calibrate to different altitudes. The The teleportation was still imprecise, his instant transmission requiring life signatures he recognized well enough to lock onto. But the Guardian's signatures were becoming familiar, their individual energy profiles mapping themselves in his sense with increasing resolution. Super Saiyan was accessible. He confirmed this briefly, a flicker of golden energy that lasted half a second and made the Milano II's internal lights dim slightly as though the ship itself was adjusting to accommodate something it hadn't been designed for. Rocket's scanner alarm went off. Rocket silenced it without looking up from his console. Ultra Instinct was the question. He reached for its edge carefully, not activating it, just locating it, the way you locate a door in a dark room by feeling for the frame. It was there, deeper than the other forms, requiring more of the stillness that this universe's unfamiliar energy made harder to achieve but present. Accessible. He let it go and came back to himself. "You've been testing your powers," Mantis said from beside him. She wasn't accusatory. She was simply accurate. "Making sure I know what I have," Goku said, "before I need it." And he was quiet for a moment, watching the stars stream past the viewport as the Milano II pushed toward the outer dark. "I have enough," he said. Then, with the honesty that was apparently a constitutional feature of his personality, "Probably." Mantis looked at him with her antennae tilted forward in the posture of deep empathic reading. "You're afraid," she said softly. "Not of dying, something else." He didn't deny it because denying things to someone who could feel the truth of them was discourteous. "In my universe, when something is beyond what I can handle, there are other people who can step in. Vegeta, Gohan, the other gods." He watched the stars. "Here, I don't know who else there is, and if I can't stop it," he didn't finish the sentence. "There are others," Mantis said. "In this universe there are beings of great power. We could call for them." "We don't have 6 days," Nebula said from the tactical console, not unkindly. "Calls for the heavy hitters of this universe take time to answer. Asgard is rebuilding after Thanos. The Sorcerer Supreme's situation is complicated. The most powerful beings who could respond quickly are," she made a gesture that encompassed the ship around them. "Here." Goku looked at the Guardians. Rocket bent over his console with the focused intensity of someone solving a problem that will kill him if he gets it wrong. Drax standing like a loaded weapon waiting for a target. Quill pretending to be more confident than he was in a way that was somehow itself a form of genuine confidence. Groot growing something green and alive in the growing dark of the outer systems. He felt their Kai signatures, individual and distinct, small by the standards of his universe's power scale, but real, warm, committed. In Dragon Ball, power was measured in numbers that had long since lost meaning. But his master Roshi had told him something when he was 7 years old that had survived every transformation since. Strength without heart is just destruction waiting for a direction. He looked at the erasure ahead, the place where his Kai sense found nothing. Then he looked at the Guardians. "Tell me everything you know about how this universe's energy works," he said. "All of it. I need to understand what I'm working with." He sat cross-legged again, and there was something in the posture that was different from before, not the meditative stillness of someone listening, but the focused attention of someone preparing. "We have 6 days. Let's use them." Rocket looked up from his console with an expression that moved through several phases and arrived at something that was not quite respect and not quite fondness, but occupied the territory between them. "You know," he said, "most people who fall out of holes in the sky spend at least a week being confused and useless." "I've been confused before," Goku said. "Useless is the part I can't afford." The Milano II pushed deeper into the outer dark, and behind them, in the Nova System's golden light, the ruins of Xandar gleamed with the particular beauty of things that have been broken and rebuilt, imperfect and precious and worth protecting. The entity had a shape, though shape was the wrong word for it. Shape implied boundary, the clean architectural fact of a thing ending and something else beginning. What Goku's Kai-sense found at the edge of the Helgenter belt, 6 hours after the Milano II crossed into the outer dark, had no boundary in any meaningful sense. It had presence, which was different. A presence so total that the space around it seemed to lean inward, the way reality itself was perpetually reconsidering its commitment to existing in the entity's vicinity. It occupied approximately 4 kilometers of volume at any given moment, though that volume shifted, not moved, shifted, the way the boundary between sleep and waking shifts, without clean demarcation. It looked to the human eye through the Milano II's forward viewport, like a hole that had learned to travel. "There it is," Rocket said, voice stripped of its usual aggressive energy, reduced to the flat register he used when his instruments were showing him something his engineering background had not equipped him to contextualize. His scanner was running 17 simultaneous analysis protocols and returning data that disagreed with itself in ways that suggested the disagreement was the accurate reading. "It's the sensor return, Nebula. Explain to me what my sensors are doing." "They're working correctly," Nebula said quietly. "What they're reading is correct. They're reading that the thing in front of us is simultaneously present, and not present at a quantum level." "Yes. That's not a thing that's possible." "Apparently, it is now." The entity moved through the outer dark with the patience of something that did not experience urgency, because urgency required a relationship with time that it had evolved past. Around it, the Kree Accusator and the Nova Corps interceptors held distance, a perimeter of military hardware that was doing the thing military hardware does when it encounters something it cannot engage, maintaining formation out of institutional momentum, because formation was what you had when strategy had run out. Goku was standing at the forward viewport with his hand flat against the transparasteel, feeling the entity's negative shape through his Kai-sense, with the focused attention of a doctor palpating for something wrong beneath the skin. He'd been doing this for 40 minutes, since they'd first entered scanner range, building a picture of it through sensation rather than data, because data, as Rocket's instruments were demonstrating, had limitations and sensation had different limitations, and between them you could sometimes construct something resembling understanding. What he understood so far was this: it was not malicious. Malice required preference, required the capacity to want one outcome over another, and this thing had moved past wanting in the same way it had moved past urgency. It consumed because consuming was what it did, the way a fire burns, not because it chooses fire but because fire is its nature. The distinction between intent and nature mattered enormously to him. It always had, because intent was the thing you could reason with, and nature was the thing you had to find a different solution for. "It's not evil," he said. "It's destroying inhabited systems," Nebula said. "I know. I'm not saying it should keep doing that. I'm saying evil is the wrong frame for understanding it, which means defeating it requires a different approach than fighting evil." He turned from the viewport. His expression had the particular quality it got when he was working through a problem that existed simultaneously in the physical and philosophical registers, the frown of a man for whom those two registers had never been fully separate. "In my universe, there was a being called Beerus, god of destruction. His function was to destroy things, planets, civilizations, and entire star systems if the balance required it. He wasn't evil. Destruction was his role in the order of things." He looked at the entity through the viewport. "This feels similar, like something that had a function once in whatever order it was created, and that order is gone, so the function continues, without the context that gave it meaning." "That's a beautiful theory," Rocket said. "It doesn't help us stop it from eating the Nova system in 6 days." "No," Goku agreed. "But it tells me that trying to reason with it is probably not going to work, which means the conversation I wanted to try first isn't available." He said this without self-pity, just the clean acknowledgement of someone updating their approach based on new information. "Which means we're doing this the other way." He stepped back from the viewport and rolled his shoulders, a physical settling in that the Guardians were learning to recognize as the precursor to something significant. His Kai was rising, not explosively, not the sudden transformation flare of combat, but deliberately, like turning up a dial with careful hands. The air around him developed a warmth that the ship's environmental systems weren't producing. Small objects in the common area, Rocket's spare components, a ration pack, and one of Groot's fallen flowers trembled slightly in the micro-pressure of contained energy. "I'm going to go out there," Goku said. "Get close to it, feel it directly." He looked at Quill. "Can your ship support me from range while I do that?" "Define support," Quill said. "Keep my friends alive while I work." Quill looked at Rocket. Rocket looked at his weapons console with the expression of someone doing rapid calculations and not entirely liking the answers. "We're not built for a fight at this scale," Rocket said. "Our weapons are going to do approximately nothing to that thing based on current readings." He paused. "But I've been modifying the shield array. I can configure it as an energy buffer. If the entity's consumption effect radiates outward, I might be able to create a reflective barrier that slows the effect on the ship. For a while." "How long a while?" "Longer than you'd think and shorter than you'd want. That's my official estimate." Goku nodded. He turned to Mantis. "I need you to do something difficult." Mantis straightened. Her antennae rose with the posture of complete attention. "Tell me." "If I make contact with it, physical contact, I need to know if there's anything still in there. Any remnant of whatever consciousness it might have had. If something created it with a purpose, there might be a residue, a memory of what it was before." He paused. "You can feel things that aren't human. You did it with ego." Mantis was very still. Ego had been the largest, most overwhelming consciousness she had ever touched, and touching it had nearly destroyed her, not physically, but in the way that pressing your mind against something of infinite self-regard can leave impressions that don't fade cleanly. "This is different from ego," she said carefully. "I know. I'll be between you and it. You'll be reading through me. My Kai can carry your sense outward if you maintain contact with me while I make contact with it." He held her gaze. "You don't have to. I'm asking, not telling." Mantis looked at the entity through the viewport for a long moment. Then she looked at Goku with the specific expression she wore when her empathic sense was telling her something her conscious mind was still processing. A slight widening of the eyes, a tilt of the antennae, the look of someone reading a signal that is both clear and unexpected. "You're not afraid of it," she said. "You're curious about it." "Both can be true," Goku said, with a small smile that was aimed slightly at Drax. Drax, across the room, made a sound that was as close to a laugh as Drax made in circumstances that weren't objectively funny. He went out in the vacuum without a suit, which made Quill physically uncomfortable in the way that watching someone do something your body knows is wrong produces discomfort, regardless of intellectual awareness that the person is fine. Goku's Kai created its own environmental buffer: pressure, oxygen, thermal regulation, a shell of controlled energy so precise it was essentially a one-person atmosphere. Nebula tracked him on sensors. Rocket kept the shield array at full configuration, and his hand on the emergency recall beacon with the vigilant attention of someone who knows the beacon probably won't help, but has decided that having it is better than not having it. Mantis sat cross-legged on the common area floor, her hands in her lap, her antennae fully extended, maintaining the empathic thread she'd established with Goku before he'd stepped through the airlock, a connection like a very long, very thin wire, carrying sensation rather than words. He crossed the distance to the entity in 30 seconds, flying at a speed that made him a streak of gold light against the outer dark. He slowed as he approached its boundary, the place where his Kai sense found the erasure beginning, and hovered there, reading it with every sense available to him, physical and metaphysical alike. This close, it was overwhelming in a way that his power scale had not prepared him for. Not overwhelming in the sense of being stronger than him, strength was the wrong measurement. Overwhelming in the sense of fundamentally different in kind, the way the ocean is not stronger than a person, but is simply a different category of thing that operates by different rules. He had fought gods. He had stood in the presence of the Omni-King. This was not like those things. Those things had will. This had only one function. He reached out with one hand and touched its boundary. The sensation that traveled back through Mantis's empathic thread hit her like cold water, not painful but shocking in its totality. She gasped. Her antennae went rigid. Her hands gripped her own knees hard enough to whiten her knuckles. Drax moved to her side immediately, not touching her but present, a physical anchor. "What do you feel?" Nebula asked quietly. Mantis's voice when she answered was careful, measured against the enormity of what she was reading. "Old," she said. "Impossibly old. And alone." She paused, her face moving through expressions that weren't designed for what she was processing. It knew companionship once, a very long time ago. Whatever it was part of, a system, a design, something that gave its function context, that's gone. Long gone. Her eyes were wet, which surprised her as much as anyone. It's not destroying things because it wants to. It's destroying things because it has forgotten how to do anything else. And the forgetting happened so long ago that the forgetting itself is gone. She opened her eyes and looked at the others. It's grieving, in the only way it has left, which is the way that doesn't know its grief anymore. The room was very quiet. Outside, against the boundary of the entity, Goku held his position, one hand in contact with something ancient and lost and catastrophically dangerous, and his Kai rose around him in a pillar of blue-white light that the accusator's sensors registered as a power output that required the Kree analyst running the reading to check her instruments 3 times before accepting the number was accurate. Then he did something none of the Guardians expected, because none of them had the context to expect it. He stopped trying to read the entity, and he started talking to it. Not in words, there was no atmosphere for words. And words were not the right medium for something that had forgotten language along with everything else. He talked in Kai, in the deliberate, shaped language of energy that he had spent his entire life learning to express with precision, pushing warmth into the boundary, not aggression, not challenge, not the competitive fire of a Saiyan wanting a fight, but something else. Something his years on Earth had built into him alongside the power. Recognition, I see you. I know you're lost, I know you don't know you're lost, but I see it. Mantis made a sound, not pain, not quite, and her antennae trembled. It felt that, she whispered. Something in it felt that. The entity stopped moving. For the first time in 6 months of recorded observation, covering every destroyed outpost and debris field and vanished colony, the entity that had no name because nothing survived to name it simply stopped. Aboard the accusator, Commander Sordin stared at his tactical display with the expression of a man watching something his military career did not provide a category for. Aboard the Nova Corps interceptors, Commander Errol had her hand on her comm unit and was not transmitting because she was afraid that transmitting would break something she didn't understand but recognized as fragile. Rocket Raccoon, whose instincts had been honed by a life that punished sentimentality, looked at his sensor feed showing a Saiyan warrior hovering in the vacuum holding the boundary of a universe-consuming entity with one hand and his entire soul, and made a sound low in his throat that he would have described, if pressed, as the sound a person makes when the universe briefly exceeds their expectations of it. "Huh," said Rocket Raccoon. Outside in the dark between stars, something ancient and alone felt. For the first time in an eternity it could no longer measure, something that was not erasure. It felt dimly and incompletely, the way a dreamer feels the edge of waking, something that might, in a being that still had the architecture for such things, have been called recognized. The real work hadn't started yet, but Goku had found the door. The entity stopped for 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Sordin's analysts logged it with the precise timestamp compulsion of people who know they are witnessing something historically significant and want the record to be immaculate. 4 minutes and 37 seconds of absolute stillness from something that had not been still in 6 months of recorded observation. Something that had moved with the implacable, continuous patience of a geological force, pausing for nothing, responding to nothing, a function executing itself without variation or rest. 4 minutes and 37 seconds in which the outer dark held its breath, and 17 military vessels in loose formation held theirs alongside it. Then the entity moved again. Not toward populated space, not toward the Nova system. It moved outward, deeper into the Helgenter belt's empty reaches, away from the density of inhabited systems, as though something in its ancient and damaged architecture had received a signal it no longer had the full equipment to interpret but had acted on anyway, the way a sleepwalker responds to a voice without waking. It wasn't a solution. Goku understood this immediately, feeling the shift in its Kai-adjacent presence through his extended sense. The pause had been recognition, not resolution. A moment of contact with something it had forgotten was possible, followed by the confused retreat of something that doesn't know what to do with an unexpected sensation. He flew back to the Milano II with the focused speed of someone who has just learned something critical and needs to act on it before the window closes. He came through the airlock still trailing wisps of golden Kai energy that dissipated against the ship's interior atmosphere like breath on cold air, and before the airlock had fully cycled, he was already talking. It's not gone. It's retreating temporarily, maybe hours, maybe a day, but the movement gave me more information about how it works. He looked at Mantis first. She was pale beneath her green complexion, her antennae drooping with the specific exhaustion of someone whose empathic system had been pushed past comfortable limits, but her eyes were clear and tracking. "Are you all right?" "I will be," she said, and meant it. "What you felt, the grief, the isolation, the lost function, that's the key." He moved to the center of the room, and the Guardians organized around him with the unconscious efficiency of people who have spent enough time in crises together that coordination has become instinct. It doesn't want to destroy. It's destroying because it's lost the context that would tell it to stop. Something created it, built it with a purpose inside a system that gave that purpose boundaries and meaning, and that system collapsed. Now it just executes the only function remaining. He looked at Nebula, which means there might be a record somewhere. Whatever built it would have left something: documentation, a control architecture, a deactivation mechanism, something. Nebula was already at her console. "You're describing something engineered rather than evolved." The way it felt through Mantis's read, it's not natural. Nothing natural has that kind of design quality underneath the damage. He searched for the right words, because the sensation he was describing was partly Kai sense, and partly the intuition of someone who had spent decades feeling the difference between beings that had grown into their power and beings that had been constructed for it. Someone made it, a long time ago, in a context this universe has probably forgotten. "Celestials," Rocket said. He said it the way you say a word you've been avoiding. Flat, declarative, stripped of inflection, because inflection would imply a feeling about the possibility, and he hadn't decided what feeling was appropriate yet. "The energy signature underneath the consumption effect. I've been running comparisons for the last hour." He pulled up his analysis on the room's display. 2 waveforms, one from the entity's recorded signature, one from a celestial archaeological database the Nova Corps had shared in Sordin's intelligence package. They weren't identical, they rhymed. Celestials built things that outlasted them. Dormammu's dimension has celestial architecture in its foundations. Ego was a celestial. If one of them made a cleaning mechanism, something designed to clear space for new creation by consuming the old. "And then the Celestials died or left," Quill said slowly. "The cleaning mechanism keeps cleaning," Rocket finished. "Forever, because forever is what it was built for and no one turned it off." The silence that followed was the silence of people absorbing an implication that is both intellectually fascinating and personally terrifying. Quill looked at the viewport. at the outer dark where the entity was retreating, and thought about Ego, his father, the celestial, the living planet who had spent millennia propagating himself across the galaxy because his function was expansion, and he had no context to tell him that expansion at the cost of everything else was not purpose but pathology. He knew something about the damage inherited functions could do when their original context was gone. So we need to find a celestial off switch, he said. Or create one, Goku said. Everyone looked at him. I touched its boundary. I made contact with whatever remnant of original programming exists underneath the damage. It responded. He held their attention with the steady focus of someone who has followed a chain of logic to a conclusion that frightens him and has decided that fear is not a reason to stop following. If I can get deeper, not just touch the boundary but push through it, make contact with the core architecture, I might be able to reach whatever the original control function was. Give it a new context, not an off switch, a completion signal, he paused. Tell it the work is done. Rocket stared at him. You want to go inside it? I want to try. Inside the thing that erases the forces that hold matter together. My Kai creates its own binding forces. It's essentially a self-contained physics environment. If I push enough energy into a bubble around myself. If your bubble fails, Nebula said carefully, with the precision of someone who respects both the person she's talking to and the fact she's about to state, there is no recovery. There are no Dragon Balls here. No Senzu bean repairs matter that have been unbound at a quantum level. I know, Goku said. I want to make certain you know. I know, he said again, and the second time carried more weight than the first, not because he was performing gravity, but because he was acknowledging it. Really acknowledging it with the specific quality of someone who has made peace with a risk by looking at it directly rather than avoiding it. He was thinking of Gohan, of Kai Kai, of Goten, of Krillin's laugh and Vegeta's pride and the particular stubborn warmth of Earth that had shaped him into whatever he was. He was thinking of them not to steel himself against loss, but to clarify what the loss would mean, because clarity about cost was the only honest foundation for a choice this size. But if I don't try, it reaches the Nova system in 6 days. And then what's past the Nova system? And then whatever is past that. He looked at each of them in turn. I have a family. A universe I need to get back to. I'm not planning to die here. A small, genuine smile. But I'm also not going to let something destroy everything between me and home while I play it safe. Drax spoke from the wall, and when Drax spoke with that particular timbre, low, measured, carrying the weight of a man who has metabolized grief into something harder and more useful, people listened. When my family was killed, he said, I wanted to tear the universe apart to reach the one responsible. I could not. I was not strong enough, and I was alone. He looked at Goku with the evaluative attention of someone delivering a verdict they have reached through careful deliberation. You are strong enough, and you are not alone. He pushed off the wall. Whatever you need from us to go in there, we provide it. Mantis looked up from her recovery posture on the bench, exhausted, clear-eyed, certain. The empathic thread. If I maintain it while you're inside, if I can keep a line of contact between us and the entity's core through you, you won't be navigating blind. It'll be harder than what you just did, Goku said. Yes, she agreed simply. Rocket had turned back to his console and was already working, his hands moving with the driven efficiency he achieved when a problem had resolved from whether to how. I can modify the suit, not a suit. You don't use a suit. I can configure the shield array as an external Kai amplifier. If your bubble starts to degrade inside, I can push additional energy into it from the ship's power core. He didn't look up. It'll burn out the array permanently, but it extends your margin. A pause. Don't make me use it unless you have to. Groot from his perch extended one long arm downward. At the end of it, a single flower bloomed, not dropped this time but held, offered. Goku looked at it for a moment, then took it carefully from Groot's fingers. He looked at this team that had been strangers 17 hours ago, this collection of damaged, extraordinary, ungovernable people who had decided, each for their own reasons and together for the same reason, that the thing ahead of them deserved confronting. He felt their Kai signatures with fresh attention, small still, against his universe's scale. But so precisely, specifically themselves, Rocket's fierce compressed energy like a fist permanently clenched, Nebula's cold determined heat, Drax's massive grieving steadiness, Mantis's open trembling warmth, Groot's ancient patient green, Quill's complicated hopeful brightness. He tucked the flower into his gi. "There's something else," Nebula said, with the tone she used when she had information she wished she didn't have to deliver. "While you were outside, Sordin transmitted an update. The Kree High Command has been monitoring this engagement. They've issued a secondary directive." She looked at Goku. "If your attempt fails and the entity continues toward populated space, Sordin is ordered to attempt a quantum detonation. A weapon that creates a localized reality collapse, essentially answering the entity's consumption with consumption of a different kind." "How large a collapse?" Quill asked. Nebula's jaw set. The weapon's minimum effective radius at this scale would encompass the outer Nova system. The room understood what that meant. The restored sectors, the new plasteel and optimistic architecture, the reconstruction zones where people had rebuilt lives from rubble because they were the kind of people who rebuild when rubble is what they have. All of it inside the minimum effective radius of an act of institutional desperation. "Sordin agreed to this," Quill said. "Sordin is a soldier following orders," Nebula said. "He filed the transmission in a way that gave us a maximum notification window. I think that was deliberate." She paused. "He's giving us time to make his orders unnecessary." Goku was already moving toward the airlock. Not running, walking, with the settled purposefulness of someone who has finished the conversation inside themselves and is now simply doing the thing. He paused at the airlock door and turned back, and the look he gave the Guardians was not a hero's look, not performed courage, not cinematic resolution. It was the look of a man who loves fighting because it is honest, who has built his entire life on the premise that pushing past your limit is how you discover you had more than you thought, and who has just been given one more opportunity to find out if that premise holds in a universe that runs on different rules. "Stay close," he said. "All of you. Whatever happens inside, I need to know you're out here." "We're not going anywhere," Quill said, and meant it with a completeness that surprised him slightly. Goku nodded. He looked at Mantis. "Ready." Mantis closed her eyes, extended her antennae, and found the thread, the empathic line that connected her sense to his Kai, that would carry her awareness into whatever waited inside a celestial cleaning mechanism that had been running, lost and alone, for longer than most civilizations had existed. "Ready," she said. He stepped through the airlock. And somewhere in the outer dark, the entity that had no name felt something approaching, not with its lost sensors, not with its corrupted programming, but with the ghost of whatever it had been before the context that made it meaningful had ended. It felt like the approach the way sleepers feel the morning before they wake. Warm, inevitable, something that in another age it might have known to call relief.